Bill Donohue is up next, but first, some news. Pope Francis once again called for ecological conversion on Wednesday's 50th anniversary of Earth Day. He delivered the message as part of his weekly audience, speaking from inside the Vatican before a few aides during the pandemic quarantine. Francis praised the environmental movement, particularly the young, for showing the world that, quote, there will be no future for us if we destroy the environment that sustains us. The Pope also commented on what he called natural tragedies that are the Earth's response to our mistreatment, a common theme in his pontificate. This year marks the 5th anniversary of Laudato Si', Pope Francis's encyclical on the environment. And in response to the economic crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, the Franciscan University in Steubenville, Ohio, announced that it will cover tuition for all incoming students in the fall. The president and board of trustees of the Catholic University unanimously approved the plan. The free tuition will go to new freshmen and undergraduate transfer students. The university has also created a financial aid fund to assist returning students who are facing financial hardship due to the pandemic. New students who take advantage of the offer of free tuition will be responsible for housing fees and meal plans. Applications are still being accepted for admission, and new applicants will be included in the offer of free tuition. Joining me now to discuss all of this and much more is President of the Catholic League, Dr. Bill Donohue, who joins us from New York. Bill, thank you for being with us. I want to start with the pandemic and its effect on the economy. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her members of the so-called squad seem to celebrate the rapidly declining economy this week. Why would they or anyone celebrate economic collapse in their own country?
Well, I hope the listeners understand here, the viewers, that we're not talking here about liberals who might differ from conservatives on a whole range of issues fairly marginally. We're talking about the hardcore left. By that, I mean people who hate America, hate Western civilization, hate Israel, hate the Judeo-Christian ethos upon which we're based. What they want to do, and this is intentional, it's not a mistake, they want to bring down the market economy. This has been the goal from the get-go. That's why Cortez comes out and she says today that people should not go back to work when they're allowed to go back to work, not before they demand better jobs. They really thrive on this. Back in the 1960s in New York, it almost went bankrupt when they intentionally, Columbia University professors giving advice to Mayor John Lindsay, said we want to bankrupt New York by getting every single person who's remotely qualified to go on to welfare. The welfare rolls went from 531,000 to over 1.1 million in 3 years. New York was brought to its knees. Why would they do that? They said explicitly, these professors, we want to make New York go bankrupt because then the federal government has no other choice but to step in and institute socialism. This is all about driving socialism. People need to wake up.
Wow. Are you at all disturbed by the reports we've been seeing about how wonderful this pandemic has been for the environment? I want to play you a little piece from CNN. Watch.
On the golden anniversary of Earth Day, it's as if Mother Nature has sent us all to our rooms to think about what we've done and to give us a glimpse of life without us. The penguins of Cape Town had the streets to themselves, while wild pigs used sidewalks in Corsica. Locals in northern India say they can see the Himalayas for the first time in decades.
Bill, if only you would stay home for another year, imagine how clearer the air would be over New York City. What do you make of this?
Well, you know, for a lot of people on the left, the environment has long been a religion. It's not just something that we care for, which we should be stewards, and we know that the teaching of the Catholic Church. We're talking people who idolatrize. They really look at the environment as if it's some kind of a pagan god. And that's what's at stake here. What are we living in some underdeveloped or developing world where we're all going to look up at the sky at night and see how many stars there are in the sky? Look, there is a certain amount of pollution that comes with a developed nation. We're doing much better than India and China and those kinds of places, which nobody wants to talk about. We've done remarkably well. The air and the water are cleaner today in the United States than it was 50 years ago. So we've made progress at the same time we have economic progress. These people are living in the clouds, literally.
Well, I mean, I'm offended by the total disregard for human life here. You know, it's as if humans, and I've even seen people tweet or send emails to me about humanity is the virus. Thank God we put the real virus down. As if mankind isn't part of creation or nature here, and that somehow our presence is a threat to the environment.
Well, by the way, the population control people use this, as you well know, Raymond, and they've used it for years. This is their argument for abortion. And this is their argument for euthanasia. You can call it doctor-assisted suicide, whatever you want. They are heavy into this. They want to argue that human beings are the problem, and that the less we have of them, excluding themselves, of course, you know, they don't count themselves in those numbers, then the better it will be. Yeah, this is all part of a left-wing game. It's not something that, like I say, none of this is by mistake. Some people on our side, well, they make a mistake. No, it's not a mistake. It fits in exactly with their ideology.
The media also seem to be reveling, Bill, in this very dark view of this pandemic and its effects on the U.S. economy and everyday life. What purpose does that kind of dark pessimism, that vision that, you know, all is lost, the economy's cratering, you're just going to have to stay home, the pandemic is waiting for you, if you cross the threshold of your house, you're done. What does that do to a people? You're a sociologist.
Well, look, remember Rahm Emanuel? He was the mayor of Chicago. Before that, a big chief of staff there in the Obama administration.
Right.
He said a crisis is too good to waste. We have to take advantage of the moment, as Representative Rashid Tlaib said just recently. In other words, if you've got a crisis, let's make it worse. Make it worse, because then we can bring about revolutionary change. David Horowitz is a great guy who used to be on the left. He came over to our side. And he said just here recently that back in the 1960s, he's working with Tom Hayden. They wanted Hubert Humphrey to lose the election in 1968 to Richard Nixon. Why? Because they thought Nixon would bring in fascism. That would then create the seeds for the revolution so the left wing could take over. People, again, need to understand, we're not talking about liberals. We're talking about hardcore collectivists, egalitarians, people on the left whose whole idea is to have revolutionary change. The market economy is the enemy. Democracy, as we understand it, is the enemy. The Judeo-Christian ethos, as we understand it, is the enemy. If we can smash it all, then maybe they can rise up and bring in their socialist and ultimately their communist society. That's exactly, I read what these people have been saying. I don't engage in hyperbole. I can give you exactly the quotes, exactly what they've said.
Bill, since this pandemic started and the shutdown along with it, we've seen many states and localities effectively ban church gatherings. We've seen the sacraments in the Catholic Church severely curtailed. The mayor of Louisville, Kentucky, recently banned drive-in services on Easter Sunday, even when social distancing had been observed. Your thoughts on is this overreach by state and local governments, or is this acceptable in the midst of a public health crisis?
No, it's not acceptable when you get to that level. Look, I'm the first one to say that no right in the Constitution is absolute. That would include freedom of speech. That would include freedom of religion. In times of a national emergency, you may have a temporary restriction. However, they have to have a compelling reason, and the government has to do it in the least restrictive manner. Now, having said that, I'm glad you mentioned the situation down there in Kentucky. I mean, they had drive-in parking lots were allowed for liquor stores. Now, but you can you wait in line in the parking lot of the liquor store, but you can't wait in line for a mass. That's a clear, egregious case of overreach. And then you have the governor of Michigan, who's engaged in all kinds of draconian measures. And of course, she regards abortion as a life-saving method, and that has to continue during this whole period of time too. Now, there are people who, in this case here, there are some people who may make a mistake. And they may say, well, we went a little too far. Others are doing it by design. They like to bring about the closing of our society. Have you noticed that in New York, the mayor of New York City has said, we all have to stay inside? Guess who he's letting out? The criminals. They're the only ones out of Rikers Island who are allowed out.
I saw that.
Meanwhile, we find out that subway ridership is down by 95% in New York City, but the crime rate has gone up. Well, guess who's riding the subways, okay? And he's shocked to find out when these people got out of prison, they're out mugging. What did he expect them to do? Go work in a car wash?
Yeah, no, it's ridiculous. They freed the prisoners, and now these people are committing more crimes. They're having to rearrest them. So the waste of taxpayer dollar in the midst of this. Look, you are in the epicenter, Bill. I realize both the infection rate as well as the death number is huge in the New York area. But it seems people are losing their sanity as far as public policy and how do you answer the crisis, but protect your people and not blow every budget and expect the federal government to come in and bail you out. The governor of New Jersey, Phil Murphy, made headlines when he said, I wasn't thinking of the Bill of Rights when he issued his state's quarantine orders and allowed the arrests at religious services, specifically 15 men at a Jewish funeral service. Your reaction? I mean, is the Bill of Rights merely an optional whim to these elected officials?
Well, you know, it's funny. I just read an article by a Harvard law professor this week where she argues that we have to rethink the Bill of Rights. Those are negative rights. We have to have positive rights. In other words, the government has to tell you what to do. For Phil Murphy, the governor of New Jersey, to say that the Bill of Rights is something like an afterthought, that really should disqualify him from being the chief executive of the state of New Jersey. Look, we're not getting the truth about this situation. In New York, we just found out today that Northwell Hospital Systems, they're excellent. They came out and said that 94% of the people who have died because of an underlying condition. 88% died because they had two or more underlying conditions. In other words, the vast majority of New Yorkers, just like all across the country, are not in that category. If we don't disaggregate these, and when we comes to public policy and who can come back to work, then we've got a stranglehold.
Yeah, no, these comorbidities have also always been the reason. And the problem is there is an economic incentive in many states to classify these deaths, whether it's pneumonia or heart failure or respiratory issues. They may be dying of that, but they classify it as a COVID death because it means money to that health system and at times to the state government. There is an incentive there. I've had physicians in Minnesota, in Louisiana tell me just that. Now, Bill, you can suspend, and you mentioned this earlier, you can suspend rights for a limited time due to an emergency. The question is, how long can you suspend particularly these religious rights?
Well, certainly the first rights to evolve back should be them. In fact, what we're seeing, and that's why I'm so proud of the U.S. Attorney General, Bill Barr, he's looking into this. He is saying that they should be basically the ultimate rights. They are our foundational rights. So the first rights that have to evolve out are religious rights. Instead, they're being treated as if they're a subordinate right. There's no right that's more subordinate than the First Amendment rights. And among those rights is religious liberty, the free exercise of religious liberty. The problem is that in a lot of these states, you have a hostility on the part of the governors that they don't seem to regard religious liberty as a premium. You even have the governor in my state of New York, Cuomo, says that, you know, we're flattening the curve. He said, God didn't have anything to do with that. Faith had nothing to do with that. We did it.
I saw that.
That's just how cocky and self-righteous this man is.
I want to switch gears. Let's talk about Cardinal Pell. We've been covering that case for several weeks now. I know you've written about the piece. What does Cardinal Pell's case tell us about the state of religious liberty and what can happen when a religious figure is targeted and his or her constitutional rights trampled or ignored?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because there's no person in modern history who's been more victimized as a leader of any religion than Cardinal Pell. I've written 24 news releases defending him going back for a number of years. He's been victimized in the area of Australia, Victoria, which is the most left-wing, anti-Catholic set part of Australia. He's the poster boy for those people who hate the Catholic Church. And that poor man has gone through hell. And I thank God we have all the prayers of the people of EWTN and others who've been praying for him through this. But what it means is that religious liberty doesn't mean much, particularly when it's run by the left. Now, fortunately, you had the High Court in Australia step in, and I think that they stepped in large part because they realized the Jewish guy, the judge who wrote the dissenting opinion when Pell lost, did us a major favor in the Catholic Church because he dissected what was said, and then the High Court stepped in and unanimously said he's had his rights violated. But even after Pell was exonerated, people came out and all these hate groups, SNAP and others, they still were going after him. They wanted to drive him to his grave. Again, people don't understand. We're talking about hardcore ideologues, people who are motivated by hate. They are malicious, and some of them are, in fact, evil.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of that out there, believe me. As you know, Bill, you get the letters, I get them as well. There's a lot of hatred out there, and the ideology is blinding. The humanity vanishes, and they feel they have a license to kill, essentially, because they disagree with you on an ideological level. And you're an impediment to what they consider the great good, whatever it might be. Before we go, I wanted to ask you about this case at Harvard University, a law professor, Elizabeth Bartholet. She has a problem with homeschooling. She sees it as damaging to the children themselves and to society. She wrote this about homeschoolers being a threat to U.S. democracy in a piece in Harvard Magazine recently. Here's the quote. It's also important that children grow up exposed to community values, social values, democratic values, ideas about non-discrimination and tolerance of other people's viewpoints, end quote. Well, there's very little to disagree with there, Bill, but as a sociologist, what do you make of the hostility by individuals like this toward parents taking charge of their children's education?
It's worse than that. That what you cited was in Harvard Magazine, which was an interview with her. She wrote an 80-page article in the Arizona Law Review, which I've read and I'm going to write about for our Catalyst publication in the Catholic League. She wants to close down homeschooling. Why? Because she says 90% of the homeschoolers are Christians, and they don't believe in democracy and tolerance and don't have the great values that she entertains at Harvard, which is one of the most intolerant bastions in the United States. And she then, at the end of her article, she takes a slap at the private schools and the Catholic schools. Basically, what it's coming down to is this. The left hates anything in the private sector. They want social engineering. By definition, you can't engage in social engineering, which is run by the state, of course, if you have a private sector. So if we can basically nationalize every school and every sector of our society, that allows people like her and others to take over the command center and then bring about their revolutionary changes. It's ridden with hostility, with hatred, and it's also, which I don't have the time to go through, but I will in my paper, riddled with contradictions. I mean, for a woman who's a Harvard law professor, quite frankly, she's not that bright.
Bill Donohue, we will leave it there. You can follow the work of Bill Donohue and the Catholic League at catholicleague.org. And Bill's most recent book, Common Sense Catholicism, How to Resolve Our Cultural Crisis, is available in bookstores everywhere and online. And you can read it in quarantine. Bill Donohue, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much.